to it. So Victoria, let's go ahead and get started. I mentioned earlier that title, patient-centered R&D organization. So please tell us what that means and how you believe it's improving the patient experience at Sanofi.
Ed, thanks so much for having us. We are absolutely honored to be here to share our experiences and our journey. This has been a 10-year commitment, more than a 10-year commitment at Sanofi, where we've been evolving. I would say the model, but it's more or less, it's a culture that's very pervasive and expands the entire organization, but today's focusing more in on, our patient-centric R&D. Our culture is defined in front of you, as that you will see. It's really focusing on a commitment to learn through engaging and listening to members of patient communities, their caregivers, and other stakeholders. And then from what we hear and what we learn, that we're actively translating that into actions that are meaningful for the communities. Our ultimate goal is that when we develop a new medication or a new healthcare therapy or outcome, that it really addresses unmet need. And it's all about improving health-related quality of life for individuals.
And when we're talking about an interaction with the patients, when does that first begin? Is it when the company is ready to start the clinical trial, or does it go back even further than that?
Oh, it goes much further back to that. It is really quite comprehensive, and it starts even, I'll put up just a schematic for folks to get a sense. This is not all inclusive. These are just examples, but it starts at the conceptual discovery stage for us. It spans the entire life cycle continuum, like I said, from discovery through basic research into development. Obviously, clinical trials are a large component of that, well into our access measures at the global and local levels as well. You asked a little bit about, the earliest points of conception. And I'll give you an example of, again, it really originating at the conceptual level before. Oh, and I'm seeing a question. They don't see the slides. I'm showing slides 11, so I don't know if on your end, Ed, you can put it up. But what I'm basically speaking to. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, Vicki, we just wanted to let you know, I think we just might have an individual issue, and everybody else should be seeing the slides.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks. Just with our technology challenges, I wasn't sure if it was showing. But just to give you an example of the earliest, we are working very closely with various advocacy organizations to develop, for what we're calling, a playbook. It really is the insights, the experiences, it's through a panel of individuals living with specific diseases. What are they looking for in an ideal healthcare solution, so that when our discovery teams are really at the scientific bench, they're thinking first and foremost about pathways that may, as an example, address that unmet need. And then that information is really pulled through as we get into the development stages, and we start thinking about how do we define health value for patients if this makes it to, commercial and through the approval processes. Looking also at, our clinical trial designs and the outcomes that matter, and how do we collect that part, if it's a digital component as an example. So it's long before the clinical trials, and I can certainly speak about the clinical trial stuff in a bit, but it is pervasive. I can say that it's early, and it's very much consistent engagement, because we don't want to have any light between our priorities and approaches and those that align with the patient community. It has to be completely synced up.
I'm just curious, you mentioned that the culture and how this is pervasive throughout the organization. I know that change management, whenever a company incorporates a new technology can be very, very difficult. And I remember once talking to a large pharma company that was trying to change their culture to be more patient-centric. And one person there told me it was similar to trying to turn a ship that is moving, forward at a very quick speed, meaning it's not an easy thing to do. Can you give us a little bit of insights into how you go about pushing this through the organization? Like, are you able to mention like who is involved with that, or what departments get involved, and maybe any challenges that you might be able to share with our listeners and that they should be thinking about when trying to put something like this into place?
Yeah, so like I said, we've been really focused on a patient-centric culture and approach for over a decade. When we started to do this, it was really at a grassroots level. And I can say with full honesty that, for many, many years, it's been driven by a cross-functional recognition that this is important and this is a really good way and the best way that we should be working. And when I talk about cross-functional, we had a couple of years ago, we actually got a nice award for it. It was called PAIRD, but it was called Patient-Informed R&D, and it was research, development, regulatory policy, science policy, public and corporate affairs working together. That then evolved into, a much bigger leadership and grassroots, where we were having these regular meetings to identify the opportunities. In the last 2 years, we've had a restructure bringing together multiple functions because the recognition from the highest levels of R&D, and this goes all the way up to our head of R&D and certainly our chief medical officer, who's my fabulous boss, and he's also the head of development. But the recognition that bringing together different groups that purely focus on the patient relevancy and embedding it within each project team was going to have a lot more efficiencies and a lot more direct implication. I would say, like, we have a lot of momentum. I know that, some sponsors have shared that they kind of have to convince people to come along. I think our challenge is, being able to keep up with all of the opportunities, because there's so much that we can be doing within our teams. But the value is there. The impact is visible. We even now have metrics that we're able to put forward that demonstrate the value and the implication in a shared value. It's not just for Sanofi, but value for the patient community. If we look at, other opportunities to make sure that we're definitely working with them for things that are important to advocacy groups that we're partners with. If we look at the opportunities, I know Terttu is going to talk about how a lot of that benefits the patients by making clinical trials more of a healthcare opportunity that's really integrated into their lives a little bit more easily. Those are all things that make it possible. So I do know that there's different stages of being able to implement this depending on the company, but it has to come, I would say, in my own personal opinion, and of course I have to use the disclaimer that the opinions are mine and mine only, not of our company, but I believe it is shared, that when everybody rallies around it, then you have a groundswell. And we all have, I should also say that we all have within research and development objectives every year that are linked back to making sure that we are working in a pure patient-focused, patient-centered manner. So like I said, it's really part of the fabric from every end of how we work.